the world returns to the gold standard just without the dollar. Because when the world was on a dollar standard after Bretton Woods, it was because the dollar was not only backed by gold, but redeemable on demand into gold. And after we defaulted, the dollar lost a lot of value in the 1970s, about 2/3 of its value relative to the Deutsche Mark, the yen, and Swiss franc. But it continued to serve as the reserve, and it's a reserve currency to this day. I think that status is what's in jeopardy. Yes, I was born in 1963, so I was 8. Well, gold is real money. My father taught me about gold a long time ago. In fact, my father was one of the few people who actually testified in front of the Senate Committee on Money and Banking against going off the gold standard. And my father was the only one that said that if we went off the gold standard, the price of gold would go up and that the value of the dollar would go down and that we'd have lots of inflation. All of the other government witnesses, including the then Secretary of the Treasury and the then head of the Federal Reserve, they all said that if we went off the gold standard, the price of gold, which was about $35 an ounce at the time, they said the price of gold would fall. They thought the dollar was supporting gold instead of the other way around. So they were talking about how great the economy was going to be if we can only remove the shackles of the gold standard. And my father was the only one who testified and got it right because he laid out exactly what was going to happen in the 1970s. And it happened exactly the way he said and the exact opposite of what the Secretary of the Treasury and the Federal Reserve said. And you know what? The Secretary of the Treasury and the Federal Reserve head are just as incompetent now, maybe even more so than they were back then since COVID. I mean, the Federal Reserve has done everything wrong since COVID. And despite the fact that everybody is praising them for what they did, remember, everybody praised them for all the bailouts and all the stimulus following 2008. And they praised them when they bailed everything out after the dot-com bubble popped. But all those were policy mistakes. What the Federal Reserve should have done following the outbreak of COVID was withdraw money from circulation, allow interest rates to go up. Because the problem with COVID, and I said this at the time, was a supply problem. People were leaving their jobs. Companies were shutting down. People were staying home. They weren't working. They weren't producing goods. They weren't providing services. So we had a lot less stuff to buy. What the Federal Reserve needed to do was reduce the money supply so that money supply went down with goods supply. Instead, they did the opposite. They flooded the economy with money. They printed all this money and sent it out to everybody. So what happened? We increased demand while we were decreasing supply. That's why you're seeing this huge increase in consumer prices right now. It would look pretty bad for America because a return to the gold standard would mean a rejection of the dollar standard. If the dollar was no longer desired as the reserve, the value of the dollar on international exchanges would collapse because we have these record trade deficits. I mean, the last trade deficit we had, all-time record high, we're running trade deficits of about $1.2 trillion a year. It is enormous. But the only reason we could do this is because the world will take dollars for their stuff. But if they go back to a gold standard, they ain't going to take dollars for their stuff. We're going to have to give them gold, which we don't have, or we're going to have to produce stuff, which we can't because we don't have the factories. We don't have the infrastructure, the labor force, the supply chains. So the dollar is going to collapse. And what's going to happen is all of these products that Americans take for granted are on the shelves when they want to buy something. They're all going to be gone because we're not going to be able to afford them. So the entire American standard of living is going to collapse. Now, it's not going to make that big a difference for a lot of the other countries outside the US because they don't issue reserve currencies. You know, if you're living in New Zealand, for example, the New Zealand dollar isn't the reserve currency. So if you want to import something, you've got to export something. People in New Zealand have to earn dollars. We don't have to earn dollars. We just print them. Now the people in New Zealand will start earning gold instead of dollars. But the change for America is huge because we used to be able to print dollars. We can't print gold. We have to earn gold just like everybody else. And that's a game changer for Americans. But it's also a game changer for people who have savings, people who are hoping to retire. If you think you're going to retire on a bunch of dollars, you know, you got another thing coming. It's the dollars that are going to retire, not you. You're going to keep on working unless you take action now to divest yourself of US dollars and dollar-denominated assets and buy some real things. Foreign stocks, property, gold and silver. You got to get out of paper and into actual things that have real value and that can generate real income.
The U.S. will come out with a Fed coin in 2024. Now, that could be a rumor, as generally is. It's just reported guidance by the Fed. Bullshit, in other words. Would that solve the problem?
That's just going to make the problem worse. That's just going to make it easier for the Federal Reserve to create inflation, because instead of creating paper currency, they just create digital currency. And you have all these lunatics in Washington. They want to use a Fed coin as a way for the Federal Reserve to put money right into the pockets of American citizens. See, they're tired of quantitative easing for Wall Street, where the Federal Reserve prints money so that Wall Street bankers can get rich. But the problem is nobody gets rich by printing money. You're just creating inflation.
If there's a crash in that stock market, what's going to happen to the baby boomers? That's the big question.
What they have to worry about is not just the crash of the stock market, because that could happen. But what's going to be worse is if the stock market doesn't crash, because the only thing that's going to prevent the stock market from crashing is the dollar crashing instead. And that's even worse if you're planning on retiring. So I think the baby boom is probably screwed either way, unless they act now and completely change their investment portfolios to be prepared for both a stock market crash or a dollar crash. They have to be prepared for either one. But the dollar crash is actually worse.
So how will a dollar crash look different than a stock market crash, Peter?
Well, in the dollar crash, the stock market goes up, but it doesn't matter that it went up because the value goes down anyway. I mean, go take a look at a chart of the Zimbabwe stock market. That market never crashed. It went straight up. The problem is it didn't go up as much as the Zimbabwe dollar went down. You could see the stock market going up, but if everything at the supermarket is going up 2 or 3 times as fast, you're not getting richer. You're getting poorer, even though you have a higher net worth in dollars. Look, there are lots of billionaires in Zimbabwe. There are trillionaires in Zimbabwe. Who cares? I mean, you're a trillionaire, but you're broke because the money isn't worth anything. So if you think you're going to retire because you got $5 million, $10 million, you don't know. What if $10 million is what it costs to buy a cup of coffee? You can't retire on one coffee cup. The worst thing you can be in inflation is a creditor. So you want to be a debtor. In deflation, it's good to be a creditor because the value of the money goes up. And if the borrower defaults, you get their assets. If you borrow money to buy a piece of property and everything crashes and you can't pay the loan back, the lender takes the property. He's got the collateral, so he's got something. But if the dollar crashes, the lender's got nothing. He's got worthless money, and you've got a piece of property that you basically got for nothing because you don't really have to pay back the money that you borrowed. You borrowed money that had real value. But the problem for a lot of people who end up owning their home free and clear is, what if something goes wrong? The maintenance costs are going to go through the roof. The cost of materials, the cost of insurance, and then your electric bill, all your utilities. Things are going to skyrocket in price. So you may not have to pay your mortgage, but your electric bill may be a lot higher than what your mortgage used to be. Don't save dollars because you're just a sucker if you do that. So save real money, buy gold and silver, and accumulate assets, real assets outside the United States that pay good dividends, and that during an inflationary time period, you want to own companies that can immediately pass on their higher costs to their consumers by raising their prices. So you want to have businesses where the customer is going to pay the higher price, because there are some businesses where if you raise your price, you're going to lose your customers. Or there's a hierarchy of needs, and there are certain things that people need, and they're going to buy the things they need before the things they want. And if the things they need get really expensive, so I want to own the companies that are selling the stuff that people need, because that's where you have the most success at raising prices and still maintaining your customers. You need these inflation hedges. You got to get out of the dollar. You got to understand the enormity of the change that is about to take place and the profound impact it's going to have on the standard of living in the United States. The worst part about it is, though, the political climate for this crisis could not be worse, because capitalism has never been less popular and socialism has never been more glorified. And I think a lot of people are going to look at this financial apocalypse, really, that we're going to have, and they're just going to blame it on capitalism. They're going to blame it on the rich. They're going to blame it on the bankers. And they're going to say the solution is that we just have government do everything. Government needs to take control.